May 1942, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. A crowd of generals and ordnance officers gathered to watch 5 different anti-tank weapons compete for the contract that would arm American infantry against German armor. 5 spigot mortars fired at a moving tank target. Every one of them missed. Then 2 Army officers stepped forward with something that looked like a joke. A steel tube, open at both ends. No carriage, no wheels, no crew, just a pipe with a trigger and a shoulder stock. The sights had been fabricated that morning from a bent wire coat hanger using a broken nail. Colonel Leslie Skinner shouldered the tube. Lieutenant Edward Oule loaded a rocket from the rear. Skinner pulled the trigger. A rocket streaked across the proving ground at 265 feet per second and slammed into the moving tank. He fired again. Again. Hit. Major General Gladion Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering for the Ordnance Department, was so impressed he grabbed the launcher and fired it himself. Then he turned to the observers and said what everyone was thinking. "It sure looks like Bob Burns's bazooka." The name stuck. Within weeks, General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the United States Army, ordered 5,000 units on the spot. General Electric received the production contract on May 20th. By June 14th, the first batch rolled off the line in Bridgeport, Connecticut. 30 days from demonstration to delivery. The M1 bazooka would go on to revolutionize infantry warfare. For the first time in history, a single soldier could destroy a tank. And when the Germans captured examples in Tunisia, they were so impressed they built their own version. 314,895 copies. The sincerest form of flattery in the weapons business. This is the story of a steel tube with coat hanger sights that changed warfare forever. By 1941, the American infantry had a serious problem. German tanks were rolling across Europe, crushing everything in their path. Poland fell in weeks. France in 6 weeks. The British Expeditionary Force barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving most of its heavy equipment on the beaches. German panzer divisions seemed unstoppable. American foot soldiers had almost nothing to stop them. The standard American anti-armor capability came from the 50 caliber M2 Browning machine gun. The M2 was an excellent weapon. It fired armor-piercing rounds at 2,900 feet per second. At 500 yards, it could penetrate approximately 25 millimeters of steel armor. That was adequate against the light tanks of the 1930s, vehicles weighing 8 to 12 tons with thin armor designed mainly to stop rifle bullets. But German tanks had evolved. The Panzer III medium tank carried 30 to 50 millimeters of frontal armor. The Panzer IV had up to 80 millimeters. The 50 caliber rounds bounced off harmlessly. Soldiers firing at German tanks might as well have been throwing rocks. The psychological effect was devastating. Infantry who encountered tanks without adequate anti-tank weapons experienced what soldiers called tank terror. They felt helpless, exposed, unable to fight back. This helplessness could break unit cohesion faster than casualties. The 37mm M3 anti-tank gun could punch through 53 millimeters of armor at 500 yards. Better, but still insufficient against the heavier German vehicles. And there was another problem. The M3 weighed 912 pounds. It required a crew of 4 to 5 men to move it, set it up, aim it, fire it, and displace. An infantry squad couldn't carry it into close combat. It couldn't accompany troops through rough terrain or into buildings. It had to be positioned in advance and wait for tanks to come within range. The larger 57mm M1 anti-tank gun weighed 2,810 pounds. It needed a vehicle to tow it. The infantry's only organic anti-tank weapons were too heavy for soldiers to carry and too slow to respond when tanks appeared, unexpectedly. What the infantry needed was something a single soldier could carry, aim, and fire. Something that could destroy a tank at close range without requiring a gun crew or a towed carriage. In late 1941, the Army developed the M10-shaped charge rifle grenade. This was a genuine breakthrough. based on a revolutionary principle discovered by American scientist Charles Munro in 1888. The Munro effect worked like this. A cone-shaped cavity in an explosive charge, lined with copper or another metal, focused the detonation into a superplastic jet, moving at hypersonic speed, up to 25 times the speed of sound, 10,000 meters per second. This jet could punch through armor regardless of the explosive velocity. It didn't matter how fast the projectile was traveling when it hit. The shaped charge created its own penetrating force. The M10 grenade used this principle. It could penetrate 50 millimeters of armor, enough to defeat the side armor of any German tank in service. The general public remained in the dark about how shaped charges worked until early 1945, when the Army cooperated with Popular Science magazine on an article titled "It Makes Steel Flow Like Mud." Until then, many people believed it was some kind of secret super explosive, but the M10 had a fatal flaw. It weighed 3.5 pounds, too heavy to throw by hand, too heavy to fire from a rifle without destroying both the rifle and the soldier's shoulder. The Army tried mounting it on the .50 caliber machine gun, but even that weapon couldn't handle the recoil. The United States Army had a warhead that could kill tanks. It had no way to deliver it to the target. The solution came from combining two existing technologies in a way nobody had tried before. The first ingredient came from Robert Goddard, the father of American rocketry. In 1918, during World War I, Goddard was working at Clark University and conducting experiments at Mount Wilson Observatory for security reasons. Sponsored by the Army Signal Corps, he designed a tube-launched rocket for military use. On November 6, 1918, he demonstrated his launcher at Aberdeen Proving Ground, using two music stands as a launch platform. Military observers were impressed. The weapon worked. A soldier could shoulder the tube, fire a rocket, and hit a target. There was virtually no recoil because the exhaust gases escaped out the rear of the tube. The Army requested immediate production. Then, 5 days later, the armistice ended World War I. The project was shelved. Goddard turned his attention to space, exploration. He would later become famous for launching the world's first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926. But his infantry weapon gathered dust for 24 years. The second ingredient was the shaped charge, developed for military use by Swiss inventor Henry Mohaupt in the late 1930s. Mohaupt established a laboratory in Zurich to develop an effective anti-tank weapon that infantry soldiers could use. He refined the Munro effect into a practical warhead with a metal-lined conical cavity. Before the war, Mohaupt demonstrated his invention to British and French ordnance authorities. When France fell in June 1940, the French shared the technology with the American Ordnance Department. They recognized the significance of Mohaupt's research and invited him to the United States, where he worked as a consultant on the bazooka project. Concurrently, German inventors were developing their own shaped charges. Their work led to the first documented use of the technology in warfare during the assault on the Belgian fortress of Eben Emael on May 10, 1940. German glider-borne troops used shaped charges to breach the fortress defenses. Claims for priority of invention remained disputed due to secrecy, espionage, and commercial interests. The man who combined rockets and shaped charges was Colonel Leslie Skinner, a West Point ordnance officer who had been assigned to the Army's rocket program. Skinner was responsible for a program with virtually no budget and no guidance about what he was supposed to develop. Money for projects never filtered down, but Skinner benefited from the work of Robert Goddard and his assistant Clarence Hickman, who had worked with Goddard on the 1918 rocket demonstration. When Skinner received an M10-shaped charge grenade, he immediately saw the answer. The rocket would deliver the warhead without recoil, and the shaped charge would defeat the armor. His assistant, Lieutenant Edward Uhl, a recent graduate of Lehigh University, with a thorough grounding in physics and engineering, had the same insight. According to Uhl's own account, he was walking past a scrap pile when he spotted a tube that happened to be the same diameter as the grenade they were converting into a rocket. Uhl later recalled. I said, "That's the answer. Put the tube on a soldier's shoulder with the rocket inside, and away it goes." Working in a private workshop on their own time, Skinner and Uhl built their prototype from scrounged parts. The launcher was assembled from a steel tube with thin walls, open at both ends. All components were attached to this tube. The sights, a front handle, a pistol grip, a shoulder stock taken from a Thompson submachine gun. The firing mechanism was electric, powered by 2 flashlight batteries installed inside the wooden stock. 2 alligator clips connected the batteries to the rocket's ignition wire. A doorbell push button served as the trigger. A guardrail around the rear opening protected the shooter from backblast. Unlike Goddard, who had demonstrated his weapon 2 days before the armistice ended World War I, Skinner and Uhl unveiled their invention at exactly the right moment. America needed an infantry anti-tank weapon desperately. Shortly after the first prototype rockets were tested by firing into the Potomac River, Skinner and Uhl took their weapon to a competitive trial at Aberdeen Proving Ground in May 1942. 5 spigot mortars, then considered the most promising way to deliver shaped charges, competed against the rocket launcher. Spigot mortars were similar to the British Piat that would later enter service. They used a heavy spring to launch a projectile from a hollow tube. They were clunky, heavy, and difficult to aim. On the morning of the trial, Skinner and Uhl realized they had no sights. The launcher had been built so hastily that nobody had fabricated a proper aiming device. Uhl grabbed a wire coat hanger and bent it into crude sights using a broken nail. The improvised aim point would have to do. The 5 spigot mortars fired at a moving tank target. All 5 missed. Then Skinner shouldered the rocket launcher. Despite the coat hanger sights, he scored several hits. The rocket flew true and slammed into the target. He fired again. Hit. Again. Hit. Major General Gladion Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering in the Place Ordnance Department, was delighted by the performance. He grabbed the launcher and fired it himself. Then he made the comment that gave the weapon its permanent nickname. Looking at the long tube, he said it sure looked like comedian Bob Burns' musical instrument, a homemade trombone called a bazooka. General George C. Marshall ordered 5,000 units immediately. General Electric received the production contract on May 20th, 1942. The weapon was formally designated the 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1, first issued June 14th, 1942, 30 days from contract to delivery. The M1 bazooka was elegantly simple. The launcher consisted of a steel tube 54 inches long with thin walls open at both ends. The bore diameter was 2.36 inches, the inch equivalent of 60 millimeters, chosen to match the existing 60 millimeter mortar caliber so that grenades already in production could be adapted as warheads. Unloaded weight was 18 pounds. The tube itself formed the structural backbone of the weapon. All other components were attached to it: a front hand grip for the supporting hand, a pistol grip with trigger, a wooden shoulder stock that housed 2 flashlight batteries, a wire contact box, a guardrail around the rear opening to keep the loader from accidentally putting his face in the path of the exhaust. The firing mechanism was electric. When the loader inserted a rocket from the rear, he connected a wire from the rocket to a contact in the launch tube. Squeezing the trigger completed an electrical circuit powered by the batteries. This ignited the rocket motor, sending the projectile downrange. The weapon required a 2-man crew. The gunner aimed and fired. The loader inserted. The rocket connected the ignition wire, tapped the gunner on the shoulder to indicate ready, and stayed clear of the backblast. A trained crew could achieve a rate of fire of approximately 2 rockets per minute. The rocket was designated the M6 high-explosive anti-tank round. Length was 19.4 inches. Weight was 3.4 pounds. The warhead contained pentalite explosive with a copper cone liner to focus the shaped charge jet. Muzzle velocity was 265 feet per second. Maximum effective range was approximately 200 yards, though the weapon could theoretically reach 300 yards. At longer ranges, accuracy degraded significantly. The slow rocket velocity, about 1/8 the speed of a rifle bullet, made hitting moving targets difficult beyond close range. Armor penetration was listed at 3 inches, 76 millimeters. This was enough to punch through the side armor of any German tank in service in 1942. Frontal armor of heavier vehicles could stop the round, but flanking shots or hits on the thinner top, rear, and side plates were effective. The shaped charge jet moved at hypersonic velocity, approximately 10,000 meters per second, and did not rely on the rocket's speed for penetration. The jet behaved like a solid, not a liquid, and defeated armor through extreme pressure rather than heat. Contrary to what the acronym HEAT suggested, the round did not melt through armor. The first production run of 5,000 units was completed by June 14, 1942. General Electric built them in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in a crash program that took just 30 days from contract to delivery. 112,790 M1 units were eventually produced. The original M1 had problems. The steel tube was made from substandard material that could burst. The bore had no gauge for production, meaning rockets could stick in the tube and explode prematurely. The M6 rocket was notoriously unreliable. It burned too fast in hot weather, and too slowly in cold weather. Issue of the M1 was suspended in May 1943. The improved M1A1 entered production in late 1942. The forward hand grip was deleted. The design was simplified. The tube was wrapped with half-inch steel wire to prevent bursting. Length was marted, 55 inches. Weight dropped to 12.75 pounds. The M1A1 used the improved M6A1 rocket with more reliable ignition. 59,932 M1A1 units were produced, and many original M1 launchers were upgraded to A1 standard. The M9, introduced in October 1943, addressed the weapon's main weakness. Battery-powered ignition failed in cold weather and was unreliable in tropical humidity. The M9 used a magneto-sparker system operated by the trigger, eliminating batteries entirely. It also featured a two-piece breakdown design that reduced transport length to 31.5 inches, making it practical for paratroopers who needed to jump with the weapon strapped to their bodies. The M9 could fire the improved M6A3 rocket, which had a blunt, rounded nose instead of the pointed nose of earlier rockets. The pointed nose had been found to deflect off sloped tank armor. The M6A3 had a short cylindrical fixed tail fin that was less prone to bending during transport or rough handling. Penetration increased to 3.5 to 4 inches, 89 to 102 millimeters. The M9A1, which supplanted the M9 in production beginning in June 1944, had an improved coupling mechanism for the launch tube and an optical reflector sight beginning in September 1944. Overall length was 61.1 inches, 31.5 inches when folded. Unloaded weight was 15.87 pounds. Total wartime production exceeded 476,000 launchers, 112,790 M1 units, 59,932 M1A1 units, 26,087 M9 units, 277,819 M9A1 units. If you're finding this deep dive into American anti-tank innovation useful, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and ensures you don't miss the next video on American war weapons. The M1 bazooka's first combat deployment came during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, in November 1942. It was not a success. Most units received bazookas without training or instructions. On the night before the landings, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was shocked to learn that none of his troops had received any instruction in the weapon's use. Quartermasters unpacking supplies in North Africa discovered crates labeled Launcher, Rocket, Anti-Tank, 2.36-inch M1. They had no idea what was inside or how to use it. The original M6 rocket was notoriously unreliable. The propellant was temperature sensitive. In hot weather, it burned so fast it could burst the launch tube. In cold weather, it burned so slowly the rocket was still flaming on exit, scorching the gunner's face. The gunpowder charge was unstable. Most units received bazookas late. Motorized infantry of the 1st Armored Division received their first rocket launchers in late December 1942. The 34th Infantry Division had to wait until February 13, 1943, right on the eve of the German offensive at Kasserine Pass. Soldiers had no time to master the new weapon. An American general visiting the Tunisian front in 1943 after combat operations ended could not find a single soldier who could report the weapon had actually stopped an enemy tank. The bazooka's combat debut was a failure, but this failure had an unintended consequence. Germans captured intact bazookas from inexperienced American troops. They shipped them back to Germany for analysis. Within a year, German engineers would produce their own version, larger and more powerful. By July 1943, the improved M1A1 with reliable M6A1 rockets reached American troops for Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily. American infantry units received bazookas as standard equipment beginning in March 1943. Each infantry company received 3 launchers belonging to the heavy weapons section. The results were dramatically better. At the Battle of Gela on July 10 and 11, 1943, Italian tank columns from the Livorno Mountain Division counterattacked freshly landed American infantry and paratroopers. The Italians fielded 38 antiquated Fiat 3000 tanks and several battalions of semovente self-propelled guns in mobile groups. These vehicles attempted to overrun the American beachhead. American infantry, rangers, and paratroopers met them with bazookas, anti-tank guns, and naval gunfire. The engineers had bazookas and began to hunt enemy tanks through the narrow streets of Gela. Rangers made improvised satchel charges using explosives and hurled them down onto tanks from second-story windows. The counterattacks were stopped. The M1A1 was credited with destroying 4 medium German tanks. Even more remarkably, one bazooka scored an improbable hit on a heavy Tiger I tank, the 60-ton monster with frontal armor up to 120 millimeters thick. The rocket entered through the driver's vision slot, a tiny aperture, knocking out the vehicle. The Tiger was considered nearly impervious to infantry weapons. 16 Tigers were lost during the Sicilian campaign. Still, skepticism remained. An after-action report from Sicily noted that most officers preferred the rifle grenade to the bazooka as a close-range anti-tank weapon. The bazooka required soldiers to get within 200 yards of enemy armor, dangerously close in open terrain without concealment. A real appreciation for bazookas developed. During Operation Shingle, the landing at Salerno in September 1943, the forces that landed were immediately attacked by the German 16th Tank Division. American troops held their ground using skillful combinations of artillery and bazookas. In these battles, the bazooka gained its reputation as an excellent defensive weapon. It could be positioned in buildings, behind walls, in foxholes. When tanks appeared, infantry could engage them at close range before relocating. The weapon gave soldiers who would otherwise have been helpless the ability to fight back. By June 1944, the bazooka was standard issue throughout American forces. Paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped into Normandy carrying the awkward 54-inch M1A1 tubes strapped to their bodies. Over 13,000 American paratroopers dropped into Normandy on D-Day, and many carried bazookas as their primary anti-armor weapon. The Allies knew that airborne units' greatest weakness was their lack of firepower. Equipped with small arms, they were not theoretically capable of fighting against an opponent with heavy armored vehicles. The bazooka and 75mm pack howitzers gave them organic anti-tank capability. Glider troops brought additional anti-tank guns, jeep vehicles, and heavy machine guns. Old-model bazookas, the M1 and M1A1, were still dominant at the time of the Normandy landings in June 1944. Even paratroopers landed with these awkward long tubes. The more compact M9 saw its first battles during the landings in southern France in August 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, bazookas proved critical in stopping German armor during the desperate defensive fighting. The weapon was particularly effective in the close terrain of the Ardennes, where tanks had to move through narrow roads and defiles where infantry could engage them from concealed positions. In the Pacific, the bazooka faced a different challenge. Japanese armor was light and relatively rare. Japanese tanks were mostly light vehicles with thin armor, nothing like the Tigers and Panthers of Europe. But Japanese fortifications were formidable. Island defenses featured networks of reinforced concrete pillboxes with walls 4 to 5 feet thick. Bunkers were interconnected by miles of underground tunnels. At Iwo Jima, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi transformed the island into a massive network of bunkers, hidden guns, and 11 miles of underground passages. The heavy American naval and air bombardment did little but drive the Japanese further underground. Artillery and naval gunfire had minimal effect on these underground positions. Marines attacked pillboxes one by one, using combinations of flamethrowers, grenades, Sherman tanks with mounted flamethrowers, ignited gasoline, and bazookas fired at point-blank range. The shaped charge warhead proved effective against concrete bunkers as well as armor. Marines adapted the bazooka from its anti-tank role into a bunker-busting weapon. By mid-1944, the Marine Division Table of Organization authorized 172 bazookas per division. Each infantry regiment received 43. Each rifle company had 3, assigned to the headquarters section and issued as the company commander saw fit based on tactical situation. The first Marine use of the bazooka in combat came during the Choiseul diversion with the 2nd Parachute Battalion, from October 28 to November 3, 1943. This was the first time Marines used the bazooka in combat. At Bougainville, the same month, Marines attempted to use bazookas against Japanese emplacements on Hellzapoppen Ridge, though they struggled to get close enough for effective fire. Marines encountered problems with the early bazookas in the Pacific. The battery-operated firing circuit was delicate. Rocket motors often failed because of high temperatures and humidity, but the weapon showed promise as a bunker buster, and lessons learned were incorporated into improved versions. The Germans captured American bazookas in Tunisia in late 1942 and on the Eastern Front from Soviet forces who had received shipments under Lend-Lease. They immediately recognized the weapon's significance. German infantry faced the same problem American infantry had faced. They needed a portable anti-tank weapon that a single soldier or small team could carry and fire without a gun crew. At that point, their best man-portable option was the Raketenwerfer 43, nicknamed Pupchen, meaning little doll. It was a locked breech rocket launcher built on a carriage like a standard anti-tank gun. It had substantial range and an effective 88mm shaped charge warhead, but lacked the one-man mobility offered by the bazooka. German engineers copied the American design but scaled it up significantly. The Raketenpanzerbuchse 54, nicknamed Panzerschreck, meaning tank terror, used an 88mm caliber compared to the bazooka's 60mm. The 88mm caliber was selected because existing rockets for the Pupchen could be adapted. This increased armor penetration from 76mm to 160mm with improved rockets. The Panzerschreck was larger and heavier than its American counterpart. Length was 65 inches, over 5 feet. Weight was 24 pounds empty, adding about 7 pounds when loaded. The weapon was only marginally portable for a single soldier. A second man usually assisted with loading. The bigger rocket motor produced more smoke and a longer flame tail. Early bazookas captured by German forces used battery-powered firing systems. The Germans replaced this with an electric priming. system using a shock generator activated by the trigger, avoiding the battery reliability problems that plagued early American models. However, the rocket kept burning for up to 2 meters after leaving the tube, creating a 6-foot jet of flame from the rear. Operators of the early Panzerschreck had to wear a protective poncho and a gas mask without filter to protect themselves from the heat of the backblast when the weapon was fired. This made the weapon cumbersome and the crew vulnerable. Later versions, the 54 with a blast shield, addressed this problem. Germany produced 114,895 Panzerschreck launchers during the war. Each unit cost only 70 Reichsmarks. Late-war German tactical doctrine called for anti-tank teams, equipped with Panzerschreck, or Panzerfaust, to set up in staggered trenches no more than 115 meters apart, engaging Allied armor from multiple directions at ranges under 70 meters. After participating in an armor penetration test using both weapons against a German Panther tank, Corporal Donald E. Lewis of the U.S. Army informed his superiors that the Panzerschreck was far superior to the American bazooka. He was so favorably impressed that he recommended the Army adopt a similar design. The German weapon's success prompted American development of the 3.5-inch M20 Super Bazooka. Though it didn't see combat until the Korean War, the British developed the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, or PIAT. By 1942, developed by Major Millis Jeffress, it combined a shaped charge warhead with a spigot mortar delivery system. The PIAT was cumbersome. The soldier had to cock a heavy spring before each shot, requiring significant physical strength. The cocking mechanism was so stiff that soldiers sometimes had to brace the weapon against the ground and pull with their entire body weight. Loaded weight was 32 pounds, significantly heavier than the bazooka. However, the PIAT had one significant advantage: no backblast. Unlike the bazooka, which expelled hot exhaust gases rearward, the PIAT used a spring-launched spigot. It could be fired from inside buildings or enclosed positions without danger to the crew or revealing their position with a flame signature. In September 1942, the British received 600 M1 bazookas shipped to Egypt for the Western Desert Campaign. In demonstrations to British commanders, a bazooka penetrated the frontal armor of a captured Panzer III. But British commanders decided the desert terrain lacked the concealment required for such a short-range weapon. The bazooka was not deployed in that theater. The Soviet Union received 3,000 bazookas and 8,500 rockets under Lend-Lease. Soviet trials found the results unsatisfactory. Testers noted penetration of only 50 to 55 millimeters, a third less than American specifications, claimed. They criticized low precision at ranges over 50 meters. The flame and smoke revealed the shooter's position to enemy observers. The gunpowder charge was unstable at low temperatures, a critical problem for Russian winters. The Soviets declined to order additional bazookas and continued, using 14.5 mm PTRD and PTRS anti-tank rifles. These bolt-action and semi-automatic rifles were larger and heavier than the bazooka, but had proven reliability in Soviet conditions. The M1 bazooka changed infantry warfare forever. Before 1942, a foot soldier facing a tank had almost no options. He could throw grenades that couldn't penetrate armor. He could fire rifles that bounced off. He could run. After the bazooka, every infantry squad could carry tank-killing capability into combat. Over 476,000 launchers were produced during World War II. The weapon saw combat in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and across the Pacific from the Solomons to Okinawa. It destroyed tanks, pillboxes, bunkers, buildings, machine gun nests, and fortified positions. The Germans built 14,000 copies, the highest form of battlefield flattery. They scaled up the design because they recognized its revolutionary significance. An infantryman could now stand against armor. The bazooka's limitations were real: short effective range of only 200 yards, battery failures in early models, insufficient penetration against the frontal armor of heavier tanks, temperature sensitivity in the rocket propellant. But these were engineering problems with engineering solutions. The M9's magneto-ignition fixed the battery problem. The M6A3 rocket improved penetration. The M20 Super Bazooka's 3.5-inch caliber addressed the need for greater armor penetration. Robert Goddard demonstrated the tube-launched rocket in 1918, 2 days before the armistice that ended World War I. It took 24 years for the American military to combine his rocket launcher with shaped charge technology and put it into production. But when they did, they created a weapon that every major army in the world would copy or adapt. May 1942, Aberdeen Proving Ground. 2 Army officers with a steel tube and a coat hanger for sights. 5 Spigot mortars missed a moving tank. The rocket launcher hit it 3 times. Major General Barnes fired it himself and compared it to a musical instrument. 30 days later, General Electric delivered 5,000 units to Bridgeport, Connecticut. Within months, American infantry had something they'd never possessed before: the ability to fight armor on their own terms. The M1 bazooka wasn't perfect. The early rockets were unreliable. The range was short. The penetration was marginal against heavy armor. The batteries failed in cold weather, but it worked. In Sicily, it knocked out a Tiger through the driver's vision slot. At Gela, it helped stop Italian tank counterattacks. At Salerno, it became known as an excellent defensive weapon. In the Pacific, it became a bunker buster. The Germans didn't laugh at the captured bazookas. They studied them. They improved them. They built 314,000 copies because they recognized exactly what American engineers had created: a weapon that changed the relationship between infantry and armor forever. Colonel Leslie Skinner and Lieutenant Edward Uhl never became household names. Neither did Robert Goddard, who demonstrated the basic principle. In 1918, using music stands as a launch platform. Clarence Hickman, who helped develop the World War II version, faded from public memory. But their steel tube with the coat hanger sights gave American infantry something priceless: the confidence to face armor, the tool to fight back, the knowledge that tanks weren't invincible. American engineering, American innovation, American firepower in the hands of every soldier who needed it. That was the bazooka.